Welcome back to Monitors Unboxed. It's time to update our 1440p monitor recommendations for the later parts of 2023. Last update was back in April of this year, and since then, plenty of stuff has been happening. Even more OLED options, even more 240Hz options, and some important updates to our favorite products. As with our previous best of videos, we tend to talk about and recommend monitors we've personally tested and know to be good, or monitors that are very similar to products we have tested. It's always worth going back and checking out the dedicated monitor reviews we produce for more in-depth thoughts on each product, but just so you know, these recommendations are not sponsored in any way by any company. They're based on our testing results and research. Plus, you can find links to all of the products in the description below if you want to check the current pricing. We've got 6 categories for you today, covering a variety of 1440p options and configurations, so I'm sure you'll be able to find something for you. So let's kick this one off with the best 1440p medium refresh rate displays. For budget gamers, the best category on the market remains the 1440p 120 to 180 Hz-ish sort of zone, which we call the medium refresh rate category now that there are 360 Hz 1440p displays. Typically, if you want to get into PC gaming for the first time, or you want to upgrade from an older 1080p display, it's this 1440p category that provides the best bang for buck and offers the most choices. Pricing continues to fall slowly in the 1440p bang for buck category. A few years ago, I'd be sitting here saying a price around $400 to $500 for a 1440p 144Hz monitor is very reasonable. In the later parts of 2023, there are enough good options priced below $280 US that personally I believe that to be the ceiling at the moment. Typically, if you spend more than $280 on a monitor with these specs, you're in the diminishing returns category where it's hard to justify the higher price tag. There are several options priced at or below $280 that I think are pretty good, so there is no standout monitor here, and depending on when you go to purchase, pricing may have shifted slightly anyway, or the pricing structure might be different in your region. So I'll talk about some of my favorites in this price range instead. Right now, you can get both the Gigabyte M27QP and MSI G274 QPF-QD for around $280, and I think it's pretty hard to choose which one is superior. Both are 27-inch 1440p 170Hz IPS LCD monitors, and while they use different panels, overall performance is quite similar. Take motion performance for example, both have the same refresh rate, and while the MSI model is slightly better tuned, it's pretty much a negligible difference in the end, and I'd say both deliver a good, though not amazing response time experience. Variable refresh rates are supported with both models, and it functions well with all GPU brands. Both options have near identical brightness and contrast. The MSI version has a wider color gamut. The Gigabyte model has a more accurate sRGB mode. The Gigabyte model also offers a KVM switch, which isn't found on the MSI model, though both have USB-C inputs. If one of those feature differences is important to you, that could be the deciding factor. Otherwise, I'd get whichever was cheaper in your region. They are great bang for buck monitors that offer a nicely balanced experience across all the categories that are important for a gaming display. In the past, I've recommended the Gigabyte M27Q in this category, the older model, not the QP model, but these days it's just $10 cheaper, and I believe the M27QP is better, so unless the old variant was significantly cheaper, I'd give it a pass. I've also recommended several LG 1440p mid-refresh models over the years, including the 27GL850, 27GL83A, 27GP83B, and 27GP850, which are all reasonably similar. The 27GP83B, for example, is $20 more than the MSI and Gigabyte models discussed previously, but isn't all that different. It has a notably worse contrast ratio and, compared to the G274 QPF-QD, a more limited color gamut. But it does have slightly better response time tuning, if that's of great importance to you. Unless one of these LG monitors was a similar price to the Gigabyte or MSI models, or better yet, cheaper, I think they're a bit hard to justify at the moment. If you want to go dirt cheap, there is the Gigabyte G27Q priced at $220 to $230 US, which is a reasonable saving relative to the other models I've been discussing. I haven't tested this model personally, so it's a bit of a risk, but it does seem to be a decent candidate if you are willing to sacrifice features and performance. Relative to the other options, it has a lower refresh rate, weaker response times, it lacks a KVM switch, and has a slightly smaller color gamut. Worth considering though if your budget is very tight. The best premium 1440p 240Hz monitor on the market is also one of the overall best 1440p displays and perhaps a contender for the best monitor right now. It's the Asus ROG Swift OLED PG27 AQDM, which brings with it a 27-inch 2560 by 1440 WOLED panel at a 240Hz refresh rate. This is an excellent high-end display offering elite speed for competitive gamers and stunning HDR visuals for single-player gamers in the one package. The main reason why you'd purchase an OLED like this is for its HDR performance, and the Asus variant of this screen delivers with noticeably higher brightness compared to the other 4 variants I've tested so far. We see up to 900 nits of brightness in HDR content, which when combined with the deep zero-level blacks of OLED, its resulting super high contrast ratio and of course per pixel dimming, it leads to a stunning HDR experience that generally looks fantastic while gaming. It's also capable of 250 nits of brightness for SDR content, much higher than most other WOLED monitors I've tested. With a high 240Hz refresh rate, the PG27 AQDM is also capable of elite motion clarity. While gaming at 240Hz, it looks super clear and smooth thanks to lightning fast response times. A 240Hz OLED is roughly equivalent, not quite as good, but roughly equivalent to a 360Hz LCD in clarity, and OLEDs are able to deliver the same response performance at all refresh rates, leading to an artifact-free experience even when gaming at, say, 100Hz. This gives this display a rare combination of motion clarity and visual quality that you don't get from other products. In fact, this is one of the few monitors that can deliver a top-tier experience in both HDR and motion in the same package. Other benefits from this OLED include excellent viewing angles, a great build quality with no obvious fan noise, a nice wide color gamut, and of course adaptive sync support. It is expensive at $1,000 US, and these days it's the most premium of the 1440p 240Hz OLEDs, but given the extra brightness Asus provide in the HDR mode, I feel the premium is worth it for high-end shoppers. The main issue with getting an OLED like this is desktop app usage. The PG27 AQDM is not well suited to productivity work or desktop apps due to its non-standard subpixel layout, which causes text rendering issues, as well as its risk of permanent burn-in while viewing static content. Neither of these drawbacks are of any concern while gaming or watching videos, but right now OLED isn't well suited to desktop tasks, so if you are planning on doing a lot of that, I'd probably grab something else. If you want what the Asus PG27 AQDM provides in terms of its OLED panel, but you don't quite have the cash to spend, the AOC AG276QZD is a decent alternative at just $800 US. This isn't as good of a monitor, in particular its HDR brightness is quite a bit lower than what Asus provides, but it does use the very same LG OLED panel, meaning it delivers all the same OLED benefits like elite response times and per pixel local dimming. Right now, $800 US is pretty much as cheap as 1440p OLED goes, and the AG276QZD performed well in our testing with a few minor annoyances here and there. I feel the 20% discount relative to the Asus model is fair and compensates for its reduced performance in some areas, so it's definitely a product to consider if you can stretch the budget to $800 but not quite get out to $1,000, which is fair enough. I mean, these are very expensive products. If you want a 1440p 240Hz monitor but don't want to spend $800 plus to grab a premium OLED offering, there's good news. Standard 1440p 240Hz LCD monitors are cheaper than ever thanks to a new wave of options that's been released throughout 2023. These days, you don't need to spend any more than $400 US to grab 1440p 240Hz, which will deliver you better motion clarity and lots of future-proofing even if you primarily play single-player titles. The two options I'd be considering right now in this class are the MSI G274QPX and the LG 27GR83Q. I've seen both of these monitors on sale for as low as $350 US, though typical pricing has the G274QPX cheaper as its MSRP is $380 versus more like $500 US for the LG model. With these two options currently available, it's difficult to recommend any 1440p 240Hz monitor above $400 US. I've tested quite a few of them, and they just don't offer enough additional performance to justify the higher price. Of the two models I mentioned, the LG 27GR83Q is the superior choice, so if you see both at the same price, the LG model is the way to go. Like the MSI variant, it's a 27-inch 1440p 240Hz IPS LCD, but LG are offering somewhat better motion performance and a richer feature set. Motion performance is better tuned on the 27GR83Q, so while both deliver decent speed and a low latency 240Hz experience, the LG model is slightly better in that department. It also has somewhat better color accuracy and a wider range of calibration options, so typically it's easier to get the LG variant into a nice and accurate state while also being slightly better from the factory. HDMI 2.1 strengthens the 27GR83Q's feature set as well. To me, the LG model does enough to justify around a 10 to 15% price premium over the MSI G274QPX, so that's the benchmark I'd set for a decision when looking at local pricing in your region. With that said, the G274QPX does get pretty close. It's still a great monitor in my opinion, and areas like motion performance and color accuracy from the factory are only minor downgrades that could be hard to spot. When not factoring in sale prices, the G274QPX can be significantly cheaper, so an MSRP versus MSRP battle has the MSI variant well ahead in the bang for buck stakes. Either way you go though, you will be getting a very good 1440p high refresh rate monitor with plenty of speed for all types of gaming. In previous months, I've recommended the Gigabyte M27QX, which is back in stock now for just as little as $410 US. This is another monitor that's worth considering, as it's pretty similar to the MSI G274QPX. In my review of the MSI model, I had both variants trading blows, the Gigabyte a little better tuned for motion, the MSI with a wider color gamut and higher contrast ratio. Right now, the Gigabyte model is 11% more expensive in the US, which isn't outrageous, but I'd have the MSI as the better value choice. I am glad the M27QX is back in stock though. It wasn't available for many months, so it's good to see even more competition in this category at the moment. I've also previously recommended the Samsung Odyssey G7, which is a 27-inch 1440p 240Hz VA monitor that can be found for about $500 US these days. The G7 has a much higher contrast ratio than either of the IPS models I've just been talking about, and it has faster response times, making it more of a premium choice. However, the G7 being curved is not ideal at this size and aspect ratio, and there have been issues with flickering over the years. Given that it costs over 30% more than the IPS alternatives, it's getting harder and harder to justify this model that was first released several years ago now. If you're after the ultimate high-performance 1440p monitor for competitive multiplayer gaming, that's the Asus ROG Swift PG27AQN. It packs a 27-inch IPS panel with some of the fastest response times I've ever measured on an LCD, further optimized by a firmware update after its release. It is a high-end option coming in at $1,000 US, so it's very much something for hardcore esports gamers, but it does deliver impressive performance. The main advantages to getting a 360Hz display like this are in motion clarity and input lag. When gaming at 360Hz, you'll get the clearest experience of any 1440p monitor, just slightly edging out the 240Hz OLED I talked about earlier. This level of clarity and smoothness makes it easier to spot and target enemies without sacrificing on resolution. Previously, to access this refresh rate, you'd have needed a 1080p display, which isn't the best these days. With the PG27AQN, you get a higher 1440p resolution, delivering a sharper image and additional versatility, as this is also a great monitor for single-player games thanks to its pixel density and excellent IPS color quality. 360Hz also brings with it lower input latency. This is a very responsive display, the fastest I've experienced at 1440p. It has adaptive sync support with great performance, especially above 100Hz, and Asus have delivered outstanding color calibration, which is often not the case with other competitive focused gaming monitors. This again strengthens the versatility of this display and its usability for all types of gaming. A recent firmware update to the PG27AQN introduced backlight strobing support through NVIDIA ULMB2, and this is a very impressive implementation that produces a superb, clear image for competitive gaming. I was a little disappointed a multiplayer-focused display like this didn't have strobing at launch, but now that it does, the feature set has been strengthened significantly, although I should note that ULMB2 requires an NVIDIA GPU with how it's implemented in this display. The only major downsides to the AQN, aside from its high price tag, are the lack of proper HDR support. This is very much a product focused towards competitive gamers. I suspect people who are more primarily interested in a single player experience will be better off with the Asus 240Hz OLED at a similar price to access true HDR. But if you absolutely must have the clearest, cleanest, lowest latency experience to give you that competitive advantage in multiplayer games, the PG27 AQN is where it's at. In the categories I've been discussing so far, the focus has largely been on 27-inch 1440p monitors, which is where the best products are today. But for some people, like Steve at Hardware Unboxed, 27 inches is just too small, and that's where 32-inch formats come into play. At the moment, for most 32-inch 1440p buyers, I'd recommend one of four options from LG. There's the 32GP850, 32GP83B, 32GP750, and the 32GQ850. All are 32-inch 1440p IPS monitors of varying refresh rates and prices. So here's how it all breaks down. The 32GP850 is the monitor I've tested here and found to be very good, with solid response times and color performance. Nice wide gamut for DCI-P3 use cases, reasonable response time tuning, a great sRGB mode, and up to a 180Hz refresh rate. At $400 US, this is a pretty good buy, though for the most part the 32GP83B is very similar and is available right now for $350. It's basically the same monitor at 165Hz instead of 180Hz and a few other minor feature differences. If it's cheaper in your region, which is normal if the GP850 isn't on sale, then that's what I'd get instead. Another option is the 32GP750, which I haven't tested. It's another $50 cheaper than the 32GP83B, sitting at $300 US. It appears to use a different panel, sacrificing the full wide gamut support of the GP850, and it isn't always cheaper depending on the retailer you look at, but it is one to consider. Also, if you want a higher refresh rate, that's where the 32GQ850 comes in, offering 1440p 240Hz at a 32-inch size for around $550, which is a pretty good price for those specifications. Previously, I've recommended the Gigabyte M32Q, which is still a good monitor, but these days it's harder to find at a super compelling price point. At $400, decent deal without being amazing. However, occasionally it's up around $550, which is simply a no-go when the LG 32GQ850 will give you 240Hz for the same price. Very much a product to assess in your region to see whether it makes sense. In the best 1440p HDR category, it's pretty much a repeat of the previous section discussing those juicy 1440p 240Hz OLEDs. So if you missed the premium 1440p 240Hz category, if you skipped right to this section specifically to get my HDR recommendations, go back and check out that section as it covers everything you need to know about my two primary choices in the Asus PG27AQDM and AOC AG276QZD. In this sort of category specifically though, there aren't a ton of other suitable HDR choices, at least that I've tested up until this point. Generally, I swing towards OLED for HDR gaming, and there are a few other OLEDs on the market, such as the LG 27GR95QE, Corsair 27QHD240, and Acer Predator X27U. But between the Asus and AOC models, most of that market is already covered, and I'd just use one of those. I've also tested the Cooler Master GP27Q with its 27-inch 1440p 165Hz LCD and 576 zone local dimming, but wasn't impressed with the flickering issues, so it's hard to recommend. For HDR gamers, at least based on what I've seen and tested so far, stick to OLED. And that does it for today's monitor recommendation video. Lots and lots of options to choose from, covering most of the 1440p categories I hope you are considering at the moment. If you do want to learn more about the monitors we've talked about today, we do have dedicated reviews for most of them that will go into the specifics around performance and features, which are well worth watching. I also have breakdowns for other monitor types on the channel, as well as a general buying guide for gaming monitors as a whole, if you are interested. And if you see a product that you're thinking of buying, please check the links in the description below for current pricing and all relevant information. So anyway, that's it for this recommendation video. If you do want to support us directly and all the testing that goes into a video like this, obviously there's lots of monitors that we need to review throughout the years to create these sorts of videos, then please do consider supporting us directly via our Patreon or Float Plan accounts. Links to those are in the description below, and you will get a couple of cool perks and bonuses in return, such as our Discord community, which is a great place to chat about monitors. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.